Hello loves, it's Britt, and in this video I'm going to talk about what it means to have your natal Saturn in the sign of Cancer. So what is Saturn? Saturn is the planet of karma, difficulties, hard work, and hard challenges, but it actually ends up becoming our wisdom and our gift because we have no choice but to master these lessons because they are just so hard not to. So this is one of the more difficult placements of Saturn. Saturn, of course, is difficult in every place, right? Because it's the planet of difficulties, but Saturn in Cancer is in its detriment because Saturn rules Capricorn. So the planet Saturn functions very well in the sign of Capricorn because it rules Capricorn, but in the sign of Cancer, Saturn is a little bit uncomfortable. And, also Liz Green, who is like the master of Saturn. Her book on Saturn is totally awesome. It's like where I've understood so much about Saturn is through that book. She says that Saturn in all three of the water signs is responsible for so much emotional suffering. So with Saturn in the water signs, the struggle is emotional, right? And so with Saturn in Cancer, the struggle and the great difficulty is with those emotions that are connected to the early home life, the roots, and the fourth house and Cancer represents that most hidden, most deeply personal inner part of ourselves, right? So on some very deep internal level, in that deepest part of ourselves, we are wounded with this placement, and it is an emotional wound. So it's not necessarily a physical difficulty or anything like that. We may function perfectly well in the world and be, great at our jobs and, have a lot of outward success with this placement. But internally, there is something very hurt and pained, and there is a very strong protective instinct with Saturn and Cancer. These people are very guarded. They can be very mistrustful, not trusting people, the world, especially emotional connections can be very difficult. So likely with this placement, there was something that happened in very early childhood that was deeply wounding. And of course, all people have had some sort of inner child wounding. But the difference with Saturn and Cancer is this deep inner child wounding becomes a very inhibiting force on their life. And it becomes something that they must deal with in order to function. So the emotions with this placement are so deeply wounded that they end up becoming this inhibiting force on the life. And so with Saturn and all the water signs, but specifically with Saturn and Cancer, there is a need to do some type of inner child work and go back to the root and go back to the original wounding and rewire that in the subconscious and change something. So quite often there is coldness from a parent. So when we're experiencing that first image of authority, right, which is Saturn, represented by Saturn. Saturn could be the father, it could be the mother, but it's definitely a parental influence. So when we're first experiencing that authority, there's a coldness about it. There's something about this, these rules, this structure that we're born into, this family that we're born into is very inhibiting to our emotional expression. So we may learn that maybe we're a good kid and we, we play well and we do our chores and we're, the good boy or the good girl. But if we express our emotions, we're bad. So we learn that we are just not safe to emotionally express with this placement, which ends up the emotions get all stuck in the body, similarly to Saturn and Scorpio, where we become very crystallized, we become very tense, and we become very fearful. Because when all of that emotion is stuck in ourselves, and we become so tight, right? We're so, I imagine this placement, they're wound up, right? And we become very nervous, and very, like it could even lead to like paranoia in some extreme cases, depending on the aspects where, we don't feel secure with this placement. This is a very insecure placement because of what has happened in childhood, and we have become emotionally stunted. Okay, and I'm going to talk about the good part here soon. Don't lose me here. It's not all bad, you guys. You got this. Okay, I have Saturn in Pisces. I understand the emotional difficulties of Saturn in a water sign. It's not easy. We didn't come here for an easy emotional experience. We came here to grow as souls and go through this emotional watery territory of the water signs. So I'm with you here. I'm for you. I'm not against you. I'm on your team, Saturn and Cancer, because you might need to hear that, so that you don't take this as an attack. I'm not attacking you. I love you. Okay. So with that being said, with this placement, there's so much like bunged up emotional energy that needs to be released and needs to be brought attention to. Now, the gift of this placement is that we truly do understand emotional suffering. And once we begin to tend to our own inner child and start being a little bit nicer to ourselves and stop, being so cold to ourselves when we feel something, not making ourselves bad or wrong for feeling something, we actually have incredible intuitive abilities with other people. We can really understand the feelings of other people, but we won't when we're caught up in our own emotional storm. So you can see two sides of this placement: the unevolved, where they actually like are so caught up in their own self and their own fourth house issues, their own Cancerian inner family life and their inner family violence that's going on within themselves, that they don't even notice other people's feelings at all. Or we have the, more conscious version of this placement where you understand so deeply what it feels like to be disregarded, what it feels like for your feelings to be not loved and not honored, that you actually are some of the most emotionally intelligent, kind, soothing individuals. You can really soothe people emotionally. You can really comfort them and understand their deepest feelings and their deepest heart, and you can honor it in others because that is what you needed and that is what you can now give to others. The other gift with this placement is like a shrewdness. They can be very intuitively gifted, like in a business sense as well, and also they can need to accumulate resources or real estate. When I think about Saturn in Cancer, it's a very like real estate collecting vibe. They could end up with a lot of material resources and with a lot of like attunement to like business sense. Like this could be the investor, or so there's an emotional ability to like tune into the markets and tune into like what stock to invest in and which real estate to purchase. And there's probably a lot of time spent on worldly things rather than emotional things, because that's what's so hard for them. So then they actually end up being kind of balanced on both ends, where they have, the material side they're really intuitively gifted with, and then when they do start to work through the emotional turmoil stuff, then they become this very, very secure person because they have been so insecure. So with this placement, it really is about developing soul security. So recognizing that inner security and inner serenity and safety, that's something that comes from within, and that's something that will come when they heal those emotional blockages and that inner violence that was taken on from childhood or even past lives. So this placement is really about recognizing that they actually become like that rock, they become that solid, untouchable, unmovable, emotionally strong rock, pillar of strength, because they had no choice, or I'm getting hot, they have no choice but to develop that from within, because the outer world, the family, the inner home life, quite often even the home life that they end up creating as they get older, it doesn't give them a feeling of security. It doesn't give them a feeling of peace or serenity. It's actually very difficult. So they end up having to create this emotional serenity and security from within, and so they become so strong emotionally, and they are really able to be that pillar of strength for other people. And there's gifts in healing professions as well, and counseling and all of this kind of deep emotional work, as well as the more business side of this as well, because there's that intuition that's very, very strong and able to make these accurate decisions. So yeah, the other difficulty, of course, is the one-on-one, the intimate relationships, the emotional relationships. As soon as a relationship becomes emotional, they get very fearful and nervous. And so that's another part of life that they need to bring in that soul security and heal those fears of abandonment and heal those fears of like being disregarded emotionally, to really allow themselves to truly open up to someone and share that deep inner part of themselves. Because with this placement, there is so much depth. There's so much internal world, and yet there can be so much fear in sharing that with another. But once they do, they are really capable of these deep soul connections, and they can really be a powerful healing presence on another's lifetime. But it's not an easy journey. It's actually one of the more difficult ones, as we have Saturn in detriment here, and Saturn does not function well in the moon sign, so it shows these emotional challenges, but there is a great reward. And I think that an evolved soul would choose to have this placement and incarnate with this, because you're here to really do this deep work and really have this inward journey. So it's so interesting, like Saturn is such an outward planet, representing Capricorn and the achievements of the outer world. And the person with Saturn in Cancer may try to get their security from that, but it doesn't work for them. They have to get their security from within, from soul, and from learning to trust and open up, and that it's safe to do so by rewriting those early childhood messages from the father or the mother, or the early home life in general. So with this placement too, you can see that sometimes they want to get far away from the family as possible, and far away from the roots as possible. And then sometimes they are the opposite. They have this need to stay super close to the family, and sometimes it's a bit of both, and sometimes it's actually like this internal conflict where like can't live with them, can't live without them. And you can see that with their childhood family, but then you can also see that with their spouse or their relationships. There's some kind of internal tension of wanting to be so close and merge Cancer, but then that's where the pain lies, so then they want to get away from that too. So it's really about realizing that internal security, it doesn't come from being with these people or not being with these people. It's actually something that comes from within. And that's something that Saturn and Cancer will realize, is that, their relationship difficulties, they can heal a lot of them by just having that sense of security from within, because they'll realize that they were trying to get that from everything else, when that can only be found from within. So I hope that's made some sense. It's a pretty complex one. I mean, they all are, but this one is like a big one. So I really wanted to talk about this today, and I hope that was helpful. I offer one-on-one sessions. I do a soul purpose session, and then I also do relationship compatibility as well. Okay, love you guys. Talk soon.